Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Asaf Ramarowski. I am the Executive Director of ASMIA, and it is my pleasure to once again welcome you all to our webinar series. This afternoon, we have the privilege and opportunity to hear from our friend and colleague, Meir Litvak. Meir will be talking to us this afternoon about the origins of modern Islamist anti-Semitism. While he will talk about the historical parts, he will focus more on the features and characteristics of the ideology, and we will dive into a lot of these topics at large. Meir is a prolific researcher and scholar, highly recommended to all to read his work. He's currently the director of the Allianz Center for Iranian Studies and a principal research fellow at the Dayan Center at Tel Aviv University. He is a phenomenal expert on modern Shiism and Iranian history and modern Islamic movements, and has written a great deal on the topic. The format, for those of you who've been with us in the past, know Meir will talk for about 25 minutes or so. Then we will go into a Q&A. If you have questions, feel free to please type them in via the chat, and we will do our best to address all of them. I do, as always, apologize in advance if we don't get to all the questions this afternoon. Feel free to email us after the webinar, and we'll do our best to respond in a timely fashion. But really, without further ado, Meir, welcome, and thank you for joining us. And the virtual floor is now yours.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm truly glad to be here among friends. I prepared a simple PowerPoint presentation that hopefully will make it easier. So if you allow me, I will share it with you. And I will here. Okay. Let me explain for a second. When I speak about Islamist anti-Semitism, it's not Islamic. What I mean, I'm referring here to radical Islamic movements from the Muslim Brothers to ISIS, both Sunnis and Shiis. I'm not talking about Islamic civilization or the Muslim world as a whole, but about an important segment, too big a segment of the Muslim world. Let me speak about three major unique features of modern Islamist anti-Semitism, as I understand them. First of all, it is much more virulent than any other public expression of anti-Semitism in the world today. It is also the most openly genocidal form of existing anti-Semitism. Islamist movements openly and unequivocally speak about their intention or hope to annihilate the Jews as a people. And third, it is probably the most widespread brand of anti-Semitism today, as it again unifies Islamists from a broad range, Sunnis, Shiis, violent, non-violent movements. Now, Islamism, as I understand it, is a modern reaction among Muslim communities to the deep sense of vulnerability and humiliation of the Muslim world by modern Western-dominated global culture, and the perceived threat that this modern culture or modernity poses to Islam. And therefore, it is an ideology that seeks to restore the purity and power of Islam as it had been in the past, or at least as they believe it had been in the past. Now, Islamism is one manifestation of a broader global phenomenon of fundamentalism, and again, some important features which are essential for understanding anti-Semitism. Islamists claim that they have a monopoly over the truth, and therefore, if I have a monopoly over the truth, then other religions are not simply wrong. At best, they're sinful. At worst, they are enemies of the one true God and the one true divine message, which means that the enemies of Islam are the enemies of God. Islamists see the world and history as a permanent battle that takes place everywhere and at all times, part of the great cosmic and spiritual confrontation between God's forces of good and Satan's forces of evil. And if the world is a battlefield, again, personal or collective, then the opponent automatically becomes an enemy. It is simply not sinful, but it is an enemy. Now, Islamists conflate Zionism and Judaism. They make no distinction between Zionism and Judaism. And for them, the conflict with Israel or Zionism are major factors in the evolution of Islamist anti-Semitism, because for them, Jews and Zionism represent a powerful manifestation of the failure and predicament of the Muslims in the modern world. Here's another, by the way, feature is Islamism combines tropes from modern Western anti-Semitism and Islamic tradition. And I think the caricatures here need no explanation. Now, as I mentioned, Islamism is a modern phenomenon. It relies on Islamic tradition, but also on modern Western anti-Semitism. If I go back to the Quran, okay, to the original position vis-a-vis the Jews, the Quran contains quite a few harsh passages against the Jews as a result of the conflict between the Prophet Muhammad and the Jewish tribes of Medina. At the same time, unlike Christianity, Islamic tradition did not hold the Jews in Medina to be as archetypes and the embodiment of the Jews throughout history. At the same time, also the Quran includes some verses which attest to the Prophet's amicable relations with some Jews. Under Muslim rule, up to the modern period, Jews never enjoyed equality with Muslims. There was no great friendship or love. There was always some discrimination. There was always some latent pressure on Jews to convert to Islam. But at the same time, Jews were entitled to the protection of Islam as people of the book, and they enjoyed religious autonomy. Moreover, anti-Judaism had never been as central and as relentless in Islamic history as it had been in Christianity, and Jews under Muslim lands suffered significantly less persecution than they had suffered in Europe until the 19th century. The only exception here, by the way, is Shia Iran, which I will not go into. Now, why does Islamism target the Jews as a main enemy, and why do we have such anti-Semitism is an integral major part of Islamism? Because Islamists perceive the Jews as the most salient, painful manifestation of the Christ of Islam. Historically, Jews have been below Muslims. Historically, or the Muslim belief is that the Jews had been punished by God because they rejected Prophet Muhammad. The Jews have what is called God's wrath upon them, al-maghdub alayhim, which appears in the Quran. And therefore, the Jews had been destined by God to be humiliated and dispersed among the nations and to be subordinate to Muslims. Israel's emergence, Zionism emergence, Zionism's success until recently vis-a-vis the Arabs is a major manifestation of Arab failure in the modern era. I'll put it, I always like to quote Tom Friedman, not the great philosopher of history, but sometimes an astute observer. He said, suffering defeat from the Jews is much more painful for Muslims than suffering defeat from the Americans or the British. And he equated it to, if the Boston Celtics lose a game to the LA Lakers, it's painful. But if the Boston Celtics lose a game to the home team of my town, Ra'anana, it's a major humiliation. And this is how the Muslims feel when they suffer defeat from the Jews. Okay? It's a much worse humiliation than from any other nation. And again, unlike the past, if in the past Islam had, I would say, a more complex, or Muslims had more complex vision of the Jews or Judaism, modern Islamists have a very one-dimensional view of Jews, again, drawing from selective readings of the scriptures and also from European themes, and I would say vilifying the Jews or demonizing the Jews. And in a way, again, Jew hatred have become a major theological construct of Islamist ideology today, of all Islamist movements. And this shift from traditional Jewish anti-Judaism in Islam what we see is a shift from traditional anti-Judaism in Islam to what I would call modern anti-Semitism. And the shift includes three major phenomena or components. One is demonization of the Jews as an active threat to Islam. More than that, portrayal of the Jews as active enemies of Islam. Second is the prevalent use of conspiracy theories, of themes against Jews, about Jews. And third, again, going back to adopting certain Christian tradition regarding all Jews in all times as diabolic, leading to eventually genocidal tendencies, something which has not existed in traditional Islamic anti-Judaism. For Islamists, the Jews and the West have become one and the same. And the Islamists are afraid of the West. They're afraid of the appeal of Western culture. They're not afraid of the appeal of Judaism. There's no danger that young Muslims will convert to Judaism. But for them, the Jews represent modernity. The Jews represent the West, and the Jews and the West are seen to be one and the same enemy that threatens the Muslim world. And to give an example, it is of this phenomenon. If you have Khomeini, for instance, okay, a Shia leader from Iran, in the first page of his book, of important book, Islamic Government, speak about Jewish enmity to Islam from the time of the Prophet Muhammad. At the same time, 3 pages later, he speaks about the Jewish Western alliance against Islam, Jewish Western conspiracy to destroy Islam and undermine Islam. Okay? Both the Jews and the West want to destroy Islam because they understand that Islam is the major obstacle to their desire to dominate the world. And both the West and the Jews want to prevent Islam from fulfilling its historical mission to spread all over the world. This is Khomeini from one side. On the other extreme of the Muslim world, Osama bin Laden speaks about the Jewish crusader onslaught on Islam. And then everyone in between, Hamas, Muslim Brothers, repeat the same words. The Jewish Western, Jewish crusaders, Jewish Western offensive against Islam. Even more so, the Jews represent in a way the most, in many ways, the most problematic, frustrating, and frightening aspects of Western-dominated modernity. Let me here quote to you an Egyptian cleric who speaks about, on a sermon on TV, how the Jews are behind the spreading of corruption and calamities all of the world. And again, the Jews are responsible for spreading the bestial tendencies and lust that are evident in the age of progress, enlightenment, and development. And here he attributes it to the Jews. I mean, who is responsible for the moral crisis of the modern world? It is Freud, the Jew, who spreads homosexuality. Okay, Jean-Paul Sartre, the Jew, who spreads atheism. Karl Marx, the Jew, spreads Marxism. Darwin, the Jew, again, is responsible for undermining the belief in the divine creation. All of these Jews are responsible for the evils of modernity. Never mind that Darwin, Sartre, and Sartre were not Jewish, and Nietzsche, someone else also accuses Nietzsche of being a Jew. None of them were Jews, but doesn't matter. Okay, take another example, is that modern technology, modern science is associated with the Jews. Because again, the Jews are responsible for the spreading of technologies that undermine tradition, undermine traditional morality, undermine the family. And again, another such Saudi cleric says, again, WhatsApp is Jewish, Twitter is Jewish, Facebook is Jewish, Instagram is Jewish, Snapchat is Jewish. All the social networks are Jewish. This is why they support Israel so much in the recent war. And the Jews have used all of these technologies in order to poison the hearts and minds of Muslims. And because of WhatsApp and Twitter, women's honor has been violated, men have divorced their women, men and women have committed adultery. And again, it's because of Jewish technology that we suffer this moral crisis. Now, so this is one major theme. Another major theme of modern Islam is the reliance of the past on the past, or the link which they create between the past and the present. A major ideal of modern Islamism is to return to the purity and power of the early Islamic community, especially in the days of the Prophet Muhammad. Now, all religions look at the past as a source of inspiration, but it is much more powerful among Muslims. Both Sunnis and Shias view the first period of Islamic history as a major frame of reference to understand and interpret almost every historical phenomenon nowadays. I would say they're almost obsessed with the first century of Islam. And again, all of them conflate the past and the present, and for them, the conflict between the Prophet Muhammad and the Jews serves as a model that must be reenacted today in order to restore history to its proper course. Now, Muhammad's struggle with the Jews serves both as a source of inspiration, but also encouragement. When Muhammad started his mission, he was alone, he was persecuted, but eventually he defeated all his enemies, and he died as the rulers of Arabia. The same thing today. Yes, the West is powerful. The Jews are powerful. Today, we Muslims are weaker than our enemy. But at the end of time, we will be victorious just like the Prophet Muhammad. Just as he defeated the Jews then, so would we defeat the Jews in the future. And equally important, the way the Prophet Muhammad had dealt with the Jews after defeating them serves as a model to how to treat the Jews now, from expulsion to wholesale massacre. And again, one of these elements is describing, is to borrow themes from Islamic tradition against the Jews, and you see from early religious texts, and you see use of tropes of the Jews being deceitful, bloodthirsty, hateful, money-loving, conniving, and falsifying the historical religious truths, and again, harboring extreme hostility toward Muslims. Now you have another new elements, new themes, that again, that the Jews are responsible for all of the disasters that had befallen upon the Arab and Muslim societies, okay? And they are the driving force behind the present negative image of Islam in the world. That is, they're responsible for Islamophobia. And as I mentioned again, since they see the past and the present connected, so the present struggle is in fact continuation of the war that the Prophet Muhammad had waged against the Jews, and you can see the anachronism. Okay, for instance, when they speak that when the Prophet destroyed the Jewish tribe of Banu Qurayza, he destroyed a major Zionist base. Okay. And again, if you can see the link between the past and the past, again, a very popular Saudi preacher says that the Jews of today are the Jews of the past. This requires no proof. Allah made their traits clear to us, and the Prophet Muhammad clarified that our war with them will continue until the end of time. Another important feature is, again, conspiracy theories, and Islamic anti-Semitism has adopted the whole scale of conspiracy theories. Of course, the ultimate conspiracy theory that has been most popular in the Arab world or Muslim world is the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. The first editions of the protocols were translated to Arabic in the 1920s. And since then, there have been over 59 editions of the protocols, in addition to numerous publications on the internet. And the protocols are heavily cited by all Islamist speakers, writers, and thinkers, and they are cited heavily almost everywhere. This is the greatest conspiracy theory. Another conspiracy theory is the blood libel, which has been used against Jews and against Israel. Israelis have been not only using still the blood of babies for ritual purposes. The Iranians tell us that several years ago, a grave of 150 babies was found in Paris, which in fact, all of these babies were killed by Jews in the past. And the reason why you haven't heard about it in the news is because the Jews control the media and they were able to hide this story. But on modern period, Israel harvests organs of Palestinians to use for Israelis and also to sell it in the black market. So here you can see how again the blood libel is used is modernized. Another important phenomenon of Islamism is to describe those we don't like as Jews. Now, this is a traditional Islamic perception. If you look at Islamic history, Islamic books on heresies always attributed medieval heresies to some Jewish figure. But it has become much more prevalent in the modern period. I will give you some examples. For instance, the Iranians claim, that the founder of the Wahhabi movement, Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, was a Jew. And in the so-called Arab Spring, almost every political camp found Jewish ancestry among its enemies and exposed their enemies as Jews. So in case you didn't know, Gamal Abdel Nasser, Hosni Mubarak of Egypt, Muammar Gaddafi of Libya, Bashar al-Assad of Syria, and even the Saudi royal family are all Jews. All of them have Jewish ancestry. Even Islamist leaders such as Hassan al-Banna, the founder of the Muslim Brothers, and even Ahmadinejad, in fact, have Jewish ancestry. This is what their secular enemies accuse them of. Now, here you can see, this is a caricature from Iran. I don't think it needs explanation how the Jews bred American enmity and the Wahhabis. In case, by the way, you didn't know, the commander of ISIS, or the founder of ISIS, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, was not only a Jew, but in fact, he was a Jewish intelligence officer that Israel planted to set up ISIS. Because of another critical theme is the emphasis on what is called Jewish corruption. The Quran describes the Jews as being corrupt, the children of Israel. The Quran speaks about the punishment, divine punishment of the Jews for being corrupt. There's the Islamic tradition speaks about the two corruptions of the Jews, apparently the destruction of the first and second temples. But modern Islamism speaks about, again, the corruption of the Jews and describes the Jews as being probably the most corrupt people in the world, the Jews being the source of corruption in all societies in the world. Again, quoting the protocols, the Jews are responsible for the spreading of drugs and alcohol and prostitution all over the world. And as one Islamist leader said, not only the Jews are the most corrupt people in the world, but basically every source of corruption in the modern world is because of the Jews. Now, there is a phenomenon here which I should have mentioned before, of attributing Jewish origins to all our enemies, in a way is an attempt to absolve Muslims from responsibility for their failures. Okay? I mean, we have failed because we are led by Jews. Okay? Egypt is in a bad economic situation because the Egyptian presidents have been Jewish, or the Arab world is in such a bad straits. In one way, it helps to absolve Muslims from their failures. On the other hand, it also shows a tremendous, I would say, admission of failure, of helplessness. how can it be that we Arabs have failed so much that all our leaders are Jews? I mean, what has been wrong in Arab society is that it is being led by Jews for decades. It is also a problem that it diverts Muslims from dealing with their problems. When you attribute your problems to the Jews, and then it's not, you don't deal with the source of your weakness and failures, you simply target someone else. Now, why is the charge of corruption so problematic? The charge of corruption is problematic because, again, they believe that it is the reason for divine punishment against the Jews, and it is a justification for the elimination of the Jews. Muslim scholars explain that the Prophet Muhammad had massacred the Jewish tribe of Banu Qurayza because they have spread corruption. This is the proper punishment. And if the Jews in the modern world are the source of global corruption, then the punishment that they deserve is elimination. In Iran, for instance, the punishment, the clause of spreading corruption on earth is part of the Iranian penal code, which is punishable by death. So again, accusing the Jews of being the source of corruption implies, or more than implies, that this is the punishment they should deserve. And finally, let me conclude. Maybe one more point, which actually before I finish, one manifestation of the accusation of Jews of being corrupt is the justification of the Holocaust. Islamist movements are the only movements today that openly and unequivocally justify the Holocaust and justify what Hitler had done to the Jews. Of course, there was no Holocaust because he didn't kill 6 million Jews. The Holocaust is a Jewish fabrication. Hitler attacked the Jews. They deserve to be exterminated. And again, to give you an example, is if you take a person, Sheikh Muhammad Jamia, who is the representative of Al-Azhar University, the highest religious institution of the Muslim world, was Al-Azhar representative in the US, who justified Hitler's action against the Jews, and said that had the Americans been aware of the extent of Jewish domination in the US, they would have done to the Jews what Hitler had done in his time. Finally, let me conclude that all Islamist movements agree that the Jews deserve to be exterminated. And the reason is simple. Jews were given the right to live as a minority as long as they accepted Islamic superiority, as long as they accepted their position as inferior to Muslims. Zionism is an open challenge to Islamic superiority. Zionism is a challenge to the divine punishment of the Jews of being humiliated and dispersed. And Zionism is, in fact, a Jewish war against Islam. It is a Jewish war against God. And because the Jews have been waging war against Islam, against the Prophet, and against God, they need to be exterminated. They forfeited the right to live. And all Islamic movements, again, advocated eventually the fate of the Jews will be elimination. Now, some of the Islamist movements have also given a eschatological meaning to the elimination of the Jews when they cite heavily the tradition of what is called the promise of the tree and the stone, what is called the Wa'ad al-Shajar wal-Hajar. Accordingly, in the day of judgment will not come until that day when the Muslims will fight the Jews and kill them all. On that day, all the Jews will hide behind trees and stones. But Allah will open the mouth of all the trees and all the stones, and they will say, "O Muslim, O slave of God, there's a Jew behind me, come and kill him." And according to this tradition, the world must be cleansed from Jews before the coming of the hour, that is, before the end of time. I will end with some more happier note. And one Islamist thinker or speaker says, why do you think the Israelis plant so many trees in Israel? They plant trees because they know that the story, the Islamic tradition that I've just mentioned is true. So they plant the trees to hide behind them, who will come and then exterminate them. Let me stop here and leave time for questions if you have any.
Great. Thank you for that, Meir. That's for unpacking a very complex and obviously very relevant to everything that we're tackling today as far as the ideology as we're dealing with all these Islamist groups. The virtual floor is now open, so we will move on to questions. As I said before, questions, please type them in via the chat and we'll be able to tackle them. Suzanne, I'll let you tackle the questions as people actually, before we start with that, let me first have Alex ask the first question, and then we'll go on to the audience. Alex?
Sure. Okay. Well, first of all, thanks very much for a very wide-ranging and comprehensive overview of a very, very complicated subject. My question is really, let's call it historical or historiographic. You pointed to a great number of the negative features of modernity, you might say.
Yes.
So blood libels and the protocols, and individuals like Abdul Wahab. Where can we say that this Islamist reaction to modernity began, or can we? Is it the Industrial Revolution of the 18th century? Is it European imperialism and colonialism? So iconically, the Napoleonic conquest of Egypt. There are various points from the 18th, 19th, and certainly in the 20th century. But can we draw a line? Should we draw a line?
Yes, I think I would say mid-19th century. Mid-19th century, when you can begin to see the Western cultural impact on the Middle East, when you see from spread of missionary schools, but also translation of books to Arabic. You can see the beginning of Western cultural Western influence on the Middle East, and some Muslim thinkers begin to speak about the cultural onslaught, the threat of Western ideas to Islamic identity. This, I would say, is the beginning. I would say mid-19th century or 1860s, 70s onward. I would say 1860s and 70s onward.
And of course,
First World War is a major turning point because it is a traumatic event. The destruction of the last great Muslim empire, the abolition of the caliphate, the beginning of Zionism. 48 is another major event.
And this meshes with the emergence of sort of classical European anti-Semitism in the last third of the 19th century as well.
Yes, but the difference is that the modern anti-Semitism is also a reaction to the Enlightenment. Yes, but they are influenced by Western anti-Semitism, but also, again, it's also domestic.
Okay, very good. Lots of questions coming in. So
great. All right, wonderful. Thank you for that. Suzanne, I'm going to turn it over to you for the questions, and let's go from there, and we'll tackle them as much time as we have for that.
Okay, sounds great. Okay, our first question is from Michael Brill, and he writes, other than geographic and thematic overlap, is modern Islamist anti-Semitism influenced by Arab nationalist anti-Semitism or vice versa?
Arab anti-Semitism always contained Islamic elements. We don't have much, secular, I mean, secular nationalism is not very popular, but there's always an Islamic element. Arab nationalism, Arab anti-Semitism, again, it's very difficult to distinguish, to separate the two, because if you, for instance, one of the first proponents of anti-Semitism, let's say Hajj al-Husseini, was both a nationalist and Islamic leader. But to give an example, Muhammad Rashid Rida was an Islamic thinker, reformer, and later very conservative. Initially, before 1914, he supported Dreyfus. After 1918, he became not only vehemently anti-Zionist, but also anti-Semite. I would say they grew up the same. There is influence between the two. Okay, both influence each other.
Okay, great. Okay, the next question is from Sharon Frisch, and she writes, are there any modern Muslims who reject this primitive ideology? Haven't Muslims evolved into modern thinking? And if there are any, where are they? They are silent.
Well, first of all, there are, of course. There are thinkers who have come out against anti-Semitism, who explain that not only it is false, but it is harmful for the Arabs. You do have such thinkers. Interestingly enough, by the way, in recent years, the Saudi press, for instance, has changed and has become to denounce anti-Semitism to some extent. You can see it, I'll give you an example. There were delegations from the UAE and Bahrain that went to Auschwitz during the March of the Living to express solidarity with the Jews. There are some such intellectuals, there are such writers. Unfortunately, there are not many, but there are. It would be wrong to say that it does not exist.
Right, okay. The next question is from Bob Block, and he writes, certainly the Islamic world has been in greater conflict over a longer period of time with Christian Europe. Has that too been subsumed in Islamic anti-Semitism?
No. World of Islam had a conflict with Christianity, but it in a way, but you have to remember it was for many years it was Muslims who were more powerful than Christians. Okay, when we had anti-Christian polemics, it was of Muslims who viewed Christianity from a position of strength. Okay, they debated Christians who were in the minority. In the modern period, the challenge to Islam does not come from Christianity. There is no danger that now Muslims will convert en masse to Christianity. The danger is the appeal of Western modernity, of Western from liberalism, the Enlightenment, modern science that challenges religious beliefs. So the Islamism is a response to modernity, not to Christianity. It is a response to the values, again, of the 18th century Enlightenment, to liberalism, to feminism. By the way, in case you didn't know, we Jews, we Zionists invented feminism, according to some Islamist thinkers. So the danger is feminism, okay? The danger is liberalism. It is not Christianity. And therefore, Islamism, of course, it speaks against Christians. Okay? They distorted the message of Jesus. But this is not the main issue. The main issue is American music, is American culture, is Hollywood, not Christianity.
Okay, this is kind of a long one, but a good one. This is from Cole Bunzel, and he writes, I've recently been reading Bernard Lewis's old book, Semites and Anti-Semites. If I remember correctly from Martin Kramer's lecture on the book, one prominent reviewer, an expert on anti-Semitism, believed that Lewis gave short shrift to the anti-Jewish elements in the Islamic tradition. So the question is, what's the share of traditional Islamic themes in modern Islamism? What's the share of traditional Islamic themes in modern Islamism anti-Semitism? Was the European contribution at the day necessary?
So it's a very good question. As I mentioned, there has been the strong anti-Jewish passages in the Quran. By the way, the Iranians counted, and there are more anti-Jewish passages than anti-Christian passages in the Quran. There are also anti-Jewish passages in the Hadith literature. At the same time, when Muslims were on top and they were powerful, the Jews were not an issue for them. Yes, there was anti-Judaism. Yes, there were polemics against Jews, but Jews were not a problem and not a challenge. And there was never the same kind of obsession with the Jews as there had been with, let's say, medieval Christianity. One thing. Secondly, for instance, there had been various discriminatory laws against Jews, but they were not always kept. In fact, many Muslim rulers ignored them. Now, you can also say that, again, while there was no harmony and love, etc., Jews were more integrated into Middle Eastern societies than had been into European societies. And most importantly, as I said, there were less persecutions. And the Jews regarded the Muslim lands as what they called a righteous kingdom. Maimonides, the greatest Jewish sage, described Muslim nations as righteous nations compared to Christians. Okay? When the Ottomans withdrew from town of Buda in late 17th century, the Jews of Buda mourned their departure because they now knew they would face much harsher times under Christians. The point is that anti-Judaism was there, but it was never as central. Once Muslims faced problems, in a way, they resurrected all of these anti-Jewish themes and they put them on center place. The tradition which I spoke about, the promise of the tree and the stone, existed in Islam. It never played a prominent place in Muslim tradition. It was there. I'm not trying to deny it. It was there. Now it has become extremely popular. Now it has taken central place in Islamist ideology. So what you have is something that has been there, but not in the margins, but not in the center, has now become the center. Modern European anti-Semitism added to the element of demonization, the conspiracies, I would say, and in a way gave stronger justification for the eliminationist tendency. And this, I think, is contribution. But I agree that the belief that Jews do not deserve life is because they violated the traditional Islamic world order of things. Muslims are on top and Jews are below. Okay? And Jews challenge Islam here, and this is why they deserve death. This is a purely Islamic point of view, not borrowed from Europe.
Thank you. Okay, the next question is from Doug Streisand, and he writes, how do you respond to David Nierenberg's contention that Islamic tradition had the same potential for anti-Semitism as the Christian tradition, but that potential remained unactivated in pre-modern times?
I think it's correct. I think Nierenberg's book is a masterpiece. I fully agree with him. It had the potential in the past, okay, but never the potential was not realized in early Islamic histories, in the early Islamic period. Sorry, it became extremely problematic in the modern period because the Muslim world is facing a crisis and they don't know how to cope with the crisis. And the way they cope with the crisis, partly finding scapegoats, and attributing the crisis to the Jews. And this is what has made something which was potentially into such a great problem today. But I fully agree with Nierenberg's book.
Okay. Next question is from Yiftach Levy. And he writes, since the Islamist rejection is of modernity, is something like the Jewish or Christian Reformation possible in Islam, or has it happened on a small scale? A split that would create something like the Reform, Conservative, Orthodox denominational separation in Judaism.
As someone who studies history, I know that you never say never. Of course, it's possible. It hasn't happened yet. There have always been hopes that here we have now the coming Reformation, and here's there were some liberal thinkers all the time that people said, okay, this guy is going to make the change. It hasn't happened yet. It doesn't mean that it will not happen in the future. I have no idea. It's possible. It hasn't happened. Now, the reason why it hasn't happened is because for Muslims, modernity has been associated with humiliation. For Jews, modernity was associated with chance, a chance of being integrated, a chance of improving their lot. So most Jews endorsed modernity except for the ultra-Orthodox. For Christians, modernity, again, was partly a response to crisis, but also, of course, opening new horizons. For Muslims, modernity is associated with the crisis. Modernity is associated with enemies. It is associated with humiliation. And this is why it is much more difficult. Also, again, the exposure of the Muslim world to entire aspects of modernity has been more limited than it had been, again, of course, in the West, where it is the source of modernity, or among Jewish communities all over the world. And this is why Reformation hasn't taken place yet. Again, will it take place? I have no idea. Is it possible? Of course.
Okay, the next question is actually taking you back into the realm of history. This is written by Carl Yes, and he asks, was the Christian retaking of Spain from the Moors an impact on anti-modernism of the Arabs?
I'm sorry, can you repeat? Can you repeat the question? I'm sorry, I missed the point.
Of course. Was the Christian retaking of Spain from the Moors an impact on anti-modernism of the Arabs?
No, it came too early. Anti-modernism was a result, I would say, of much later defeats against Russia in late 18th century, but from Europeans in 19th century. The Spanish conquest or Reconquista did not affect Muslim culture. It was not perceived as an attack on Muslim values. 19th century encounter with the West threatened Islamic tradition, threatened Islamic values, and this is why it created the reaction to modernity.
Okay. Okay, the next question is from Barry Werner, and he asks, why are these strange ideas popular among anti-Israel Westerners?
Because many of the anti-Israeli Westerners also share animosity toward elements of the Enlightenment, of liberalism, of and again, they associate Israel with the West. They associate Israel with the U.S. They associate Israel with colonialism, and I think they are ignorant of Islam, of Islamic anti-Semitism. They're ignorant of that Islamist anti-Semitism is opposed to values which they pretend to support. For instance, women's rights and gay rights. Okay, the absurd that you have the situation of I'm sorry if now what I'm saying is politically incorrect. Okay, but the slogan "Queers for Palestine," or we ignore that Hamas persecutes homosexuals. Hamas executes homosexuals, yet they support Hamas, either because they're blind to what Hamas is doing, or that again the animosity toward Israel leads them to totally ignore what Hamas is doing to fellow homosexuals.
Or the ability to compartmentalize.
Yes.
Okay, so the next question is from Martin Ferreira, and he asks, how does anti-Semitism play out in the schism between Sunni and Shia sects?
Not at all. Not at all. Well, at one point, some point. I'm sorry, both sides borrow themes from each other. Both Sunnis and Shias use, again, same arguments against the Jews. And there's tremendous borrowing. At the same time, traditionally, by the way, Sunnis used to not use a pejorative against Shias. We're saying that the Shias are the Jews of Islam. In modern times, Shias again attribute Jewish ancestry to radical Sunnis, for instance, the Saudis or the Wahhabis and ISIS, and some of the extreme Sunnis maybe would attribute Jewish origins to some Shias. Okay, so now they use again Jewish ancestry as a weapon against each other, but it's not. The reason for the animosity is not because of Judaism. It's because using the Jews is a good weapon to vilify your enemy. Okay, but it's not the cause of the schism between them.
Yeah, okay. Okay, our next question is from Bernard Heikel, and this is a long one. He writes, to what extent do you think Nazi ideology and later Soviet propaganda were sources of inspiration for Islamists regarding anti-Semitism? More specifically, isn't anti-Semitism convenient for producing modern ideological worldviews that seek to explain the nature of global politics? Otherwise, one is stuck with specific heretical religious views and acts that don't provide totalizing answers. Do you get that?
You will have to repeat it. Let me answer the first two parts, and then I will. You have to repeat the third part.
Okay.
I don't think that Nazism played as crucial role in the inspiring Islamist anti-Semitism. I know that there's such a view. I think the Islamist anti-Semitism grew up independently of the Nazis, again, as a result of the crisis before. Again, you can see it. I'll give you two examples. Okay, the first anti-Semitic tract translated to Arabic was in 1894. It was a book from German called the Talmud Jude by Röhling that was translated to Arabic in 1894. And the protocols were widespread in Arabic, and again, were translated to Arabic twice during the 1920s. That is before Nazi Germany emerged. So they didn't need the Nazis to adopt anti-Semitism. You can say that, yes, they were maybe inspired by European anti-Semitism, absolutely. Again, I don't think that the idea of exterminating the Jews came from Nazism. I think it has an Islamist logic behind it. So I think I answered the first part. Can you repeat the second and third? I'm sorry.
Sure, no problem. Okay, so then he says, more specifically, isn't anti-Semitism convenient for producing modern ideological world views that seek to explain the nature of global politics? Otherwise, one is stuck with specific heretical religious views and acts that don't provide totalizing answers? Question mark.
I think yes, absolutely. Anti-Semitism is a very convenient way for people to address their problems. Again, it explains it explains to yourself why you're weak, why you're behind everyone else. It's not my fault. I'm a victim of a much more powerful enemy. By the way, it also explains it. Let me give an example. Arabs had a great difficulty explaining the 1948 defeat by the Israelis. How could 600,000 Jews in Palestine defeat several Arab countries? There are two possible answers. One is that there's something fundamentally problematic in Arab societies and Arab culture that we were defeated by the Jews. The other one is you magnify Jewish power. You demonize the Jews as making them this world threat. And therefore we were defeated not by 600,000 Israeli Jews, but we were defeated by this sinister force that dominates the whole world. So it makes it easier for Arabs to explain their failure in coping with modernity, and then again explain to them the modern phenomenon, modern situation. So if I understand, this would be, I must say, if I understood the question correctly, which I'm not sure I did, but this would be my answer. Again, this is a very convenient way for people to look at the modern world and cope with it. Instead of looking the hard way of looking for solutions, you adopt anti-Semitism, and then everything becomes easy. Did I answer the question, or did I fail to answer the question? I'm not sure.
Well, if not, we'll do another follow-up webinar to expand on your on the question and your answer. But we're going to move on to our next and final question, which is from Cole Bunzel again, and he asks, "How do you respond to those who point to Hamas's 2017 updated charter to say, look, they're no longer anti-Jewish and they're willing to entertain a Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza?"
It was a good public affair exercise, but while Hamas published this document in English, Hamas preachers on every Friday in Hamas mosques in Gaza, broadcasted on Hamas TV, continue to speak about the need to fight the Jews, threaten the Jews with extermination, and continue to use all the anti-Semitic tropes which I've been discussing. So Hamas spoke in two languages, English to, sorry to say, gullible Westerners, and much tougher talk in Arabic to its own audiences. And we know in the Middle East that what counts is what leaders say to their own people, not to what they say to Westerners. And if you look at also, by the way, the discourse of Hamas activists, okay, they speak about the Jews. They speak about their fight with the Jews. They don't speak, so they don't make any distinction. So with all due respect to the 2017 document, it's a good public affairs stint, but not much more than that. I'm sorry to say.
Great. Meir, thank you for that. That's fascinating, and you've unpacked a lot of the massive swaths of history that got us to where we are. And to your last point, it's exactly the reality that we're seeing, unfortunately, on the majority of American college campuses, again, calling for the killing of Jews, analogous to exactly what you're saying, vis-a-vis, in their worldview from the river to the sea, which is clearly part of the larger objectives, probably without fully understanding the depth that you've been able to give us today of unpacking that larger ideology. Any case, I really want to thank you for taking the time this afternoon, and I look forward to seeing you in Washington. And I want to thank everybody for joining us this afternoon. Meir will be with us as to plug at our upcoming conference in Washington in November. So I look forward to seeing everybody there. And of course, everybody should come and join us as well to engage with these kind of conversations and topics that we are in the weeds in. So and I want to thank everybody for joining us. I want to thank my colleagues, Emily, Suzanne, and Alex, again, as always, for being with me, and Meir, for you taking the time, and be on the lookout for future webinars, and we will talk soon.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.